Perfect. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. You're in Sunflower. This is the Rural WASH session. We do not have the first presenter yet, so we'll skip to the second one. And if we get our speaker, we'll have him present later. So our first speaker today is Jesse Contreras from the University of Michigan. And he's going to tell us about longitudinal effects of a cluster randomized sanitation intervention on diarrhea and respiratory infection in rural Bangladesh. Jesse.
Hi, y'all. I'm Jesse. I'm currently a postdoc at the University of Michigan, and today I'll be presenting my work with Dr. Aisha Erjaman at North Carolina State on the longer-term effects of the WASH benefits Bangladesh sanitation intervention on child health. I thought I wasn't going to have much time for background. Seems like I should have loaded it in, but instead I have to get right into it. The specific objective of the study was to assess the effects of the WASH benefits Bangladesh sanitation intervention on caregiver-reported diarrheal disease and acute respiratory infection among children under 5 between 1 and 3.5 years after the intervention was implemented. This analysis was based on a sub-study nested within the larger WASH benefits Bangladesh trial. The larger trial conducted multiple WASH interventions, while the sub-study was conducted in the sanitation intervention and control arms only. The sanitation intervention was an on-site latrine-based intervention implemented at the compound level. In rural Bangladesh, a compound is what's shown in this picture. It's a group of households built around a central courtyard, which is shared by members of the same extended family. And a household with a pregnant woman was enrolled as the primary target of the intervention. So one household in the compound. But since any household in the compound can contaminate the shared environment, the intervention was implemented for all households in the compound. Each household had their latrine upgraded if they already had one, but only the target household was provided a new latrine if they didn't already own one. All households were also provided a sandy scoop to handle child or animal feces in the courtyard, and a child potty if they had a young child. Field staff visited households about 6 times per month for in-person behavioral promotion. And behavioral promotion was also primarily for the target household, but all households in the compound were invited to participate if they wanted to. So the parent trial included 720 sanitation intervention recipients and a double-sized control arm. For the sub-study, we randomly sampled 360 compounds from each arm for a total sample size of 720 compounds. And data collection took place during 8 household visits, which were spaced approximately every 4 months. The visits spanned about 1 to 3.5 years after the intervention was implemented. And in contrast, the parent trial assessed health outcomes during 2 visits at 1 and 2 years after implementation. So this study includes 6 extra visits and extended follow-up for an additional 1.5 years. And very few WASH trials have measured their effects beyond 2 years. So we were really excited to have the chance to do that with these data. Our study period also coincided with changes in the rate of behavioral promotion after the conclusion of the parent trial. Intensive promotion, the 6 visits per month, took place for the full 2 years after implementation. And then after the parent trial concluded, promotion was tapered off over time between 2 and 3 years. After 3 years, all promotion activities were ceased. So together, this means that our sub-study includes 1 year of high intensity promotion, 1 year of lower intensity promotion, and 6 months after promotion activities were stopped. And as you'll see, we took advantage of this design to test the role of promotional intensity on the intervention's effectiveness. The outcomes of our study were each caregiver reported for children under 5 using a 7-day recall period. Our primary outcomes were diarrheal disease and acute respiratory infection. Previous studies, which are cited on the slide, have found that these outcomes were reduced over the shorter follow-up periods in the parent trial. So we wanted to see if those effects persisted over a longer follow-up period. We also included bruising or abrasion as a negative control outcome to detect potential bias, since it would not realistically be impacted by the intervention, but might be subject to the same kind of reporting error that we do want to detect in the primary outcomes. Intervention effects were assessed through intention to treat analysis. Data from all 8 survey rounds were pooled together, and we estimated prevalence ratios and prevalence differences after accounting for cluster randomization and repeated observations across rounds and of the same children. All models were unadjusted since randomization led to good balance between the arms. And we also conducted effect modification analysis to see if certain factors influence the intervention's effects. And the variables we assessed were household, which indicates whether the child lived in the target household, which was home to the enrolled pregnant woman, or if they lived in another household within the same compound. Behavioral promotion intensity, which was high intensity during the first year follow-up and low intensity or non-existent during the last 1.5 years of follow-up. And season, which indicates observations made during monsoon seasons versus dry seasons. Of the 720 households that were enrolled into the sub-study, 96% completed at least 6 survey rounds, and 80% completed all 8 rounds. We compared the 80% with complete data to the 20% with incomplete data, and we found they were similar on any metric that we compared. And most compounds included more than 1 child under 5 years old, who were the actual unit of our analysis. So in total, our sample size in our models was 9,800 total child observations that we made, and there were slightly more in the sanitation arm compared to the control arm. All right, and moving into some results. Overall, we did find a sustained effect of the intervention on diarrheal disease during the extended follow-up period. The prevalence of diarrhea fell to 11.9% among intervention recipients, compared to 14.5% among controls. And our regression models estimated a prevalence ratio of 0.81 and a prevalence difference of 2.7 percentage points. Yeah, I'll pause to try to make sure you can soak in the numbers. In contrast, the intervention had no effect on acute respiratory infection in the sub-study, which had a much higher overall prevalence of about 22%. And there was a marginal difference in the prevalence of bruising or abrasion between arms of just 1.2 percentage points. The effect was not statistically significant, which is noteworthy, but since this is a negative control outcome, I wanted to point out that it's still possible that this difference between the arms indicates some level of reporting error. And I don't have time to show all of the details for effect modification, but we found no evidence of effect modification for acute respiratory infection or for bruising and abrasion. There was no effect for either outcome overall or in any of the individual subgroups. In contrast, we did find significant effect modification for diarrhea. We found that the intervention's effects were exclusive to children living in households that were primarily targeted by the intervention. Among children living in target households, the intervention led to a 26% relative reduction in the prevalence of diarrheal disease and an absolute reduction of 3.7 percentage points. Whereas among non-target households, the intervention had no effect on diarrhea. We also conducted formal analysis of effect modification and found that the interaction term for household was statistically significant. Cool. In addition to household, we found that the effects on diarrhea occurred only during monsoon seasons. And this was the same result that they found in the parent trial as well, so this is consistent. The intervention led to a 27% relative reduction and 4.1 percentage point absolute reduction in diarrhea during monsoon seasons, but had no effect at all on diarrhea during dry seasons, when the overall prevalence of diarrhea was just a little bit lower. And again, this modification was significant in the formal test. Lastly, we found that the intervention's effects were not modified by intensity of behavioral promotion. Effect estimates were not different from the overall effect in either of the subgroups of intensity, although dividing the sample size did reduce statistical power, which is why the effects are no longer statistically significant. And I don't think I made it clear that since intensity just changed over calendar time, this also is a proxy of follow-up period, and the low intensity none promotion group is also the post parent trial data. So you can think of it that way as well, but there's no difference in our extended follow-up period of 1.5 years. So in summary, overall, we found that the wash benefits of Bangladesh sanitation intervention led to a sustained reduction in diarrheal disease among children 1 to 3.5 years after implementation. Our results agree with a previously published analysis of the same effect in the parent trial, and our study shows that these effects were sustained over an additional 1.5 years. We found that the effects were exclusive to children living in target households, which could indicate that behavioral promotion contributed to the intervention's effects on diarrhea, since promotion was targeted to those households, or that providing a household with their own personal latrine made a difference, possibly by reducing the need to share latrines with other households within the compound. Either way, we also found that the intervention's effects did not disappear after tapering and then ceasing behavioral promotion, which suggests that intensive promotion may not be required to continue indefinitely to maintain health impacts. The main limitation of the study, like all diarrheal research, is that we depended on caregiver-reported symptoms. I didn't have time to go through the details, but you may have noticed that our prevalence estimates in the sub-study were notably higher than what was measured in the parent trial. For various reasons, I believe that the sub-study estimates are closer to reality, but either way, there was likely some courtesy or social desirability bias going on in one or maybe even both of the studies. And that's further suggested by our marginal effect that we found on bruising and abrasion. But there are some details that seem to suggest that the intervention did truly impact diarrhea, which I'll run through quickly. First, the effects estimated in our study and in the parent trial were about the same on the absolute scale. The relative effects naturally differed because they were comparing different prevalence values, but similar absolute effects might suggest that there is some proportion of true cases, about 2.5%, that were truly prevented by the intervention, and then it's some other proportion of cases that were misclassified between the studies. The strongest evidence is that previously published studies have also shown that the intervention led to reductions in the prevalence of some enteric infections. And since these were measured objectively in child stool samples, the results are not prone to reporting bias the same way ours are. And it follows that reduced enteric infection would coincide with fewer cases of diarrhea, as we found. Lastly, the effects on diarrhea measured in our study and the parent trial both followed distinct seasonal patterns, with effects only appearing during monsoon seasons. And we have no reason to think that reporting bias would be seasonal, whereas we know that pathogens are more widespread during monsoon seasons, and that higher prevalence of a pathogen in the environment can explain why there were seasonal effects on diarrhea. And I want to point out one contextual factor that I think might explain this sanitation intervention's unique impact on diarrheal disease within the literature, which is that sanitation norms were fairly high in this site before the trial took place. Almost all households started the study with access to a latrine within their compound, and reported use among adults was high. So unlike interventions in other sites with lower baseline access to sanitation, this intervention was not started from scratch, and it wasn't tasked with generating demand in the first place. So sanitation norms were already in place but the trial was able to reduce the number of households that were sharing a latrine by constructing new latrines and improved the quality of all existing latrines. In contrast, safe management of child feces was not a prevalent norm at baseline, possibly because child feces is often not considered as dangerous as adult feces. And we've actually conducted a formal mediation analysis on the study, which has not been peer reviewed or published, but I felt it was important to mention while I had a captive audience. And our mediation analysis suggests that improved child feces management, including reduced open defecation among children and safer removal of child feces from the courtyard, was actually the key pathway that led to the intervention's effects on diarrheal disease. But more on that later, something I just want to point out. And that concludes what I had for you. Of course, I'd like to thank everyone who did the much harder work of collecting the data so that I could contribute to the study, mostly the participants. Thank you all. Happy to take questions.
Questions for Jesse?
Was the intensity of the behavior promotion, that was with chronological time, not child age?
Right. Yes.
Okay. Did you look at all of it, like some type of heterogeneity? There might not be much, but with child age in terms of like aging out of the promotions.
Yeah. I've never gotten to do this. I actually have an extra slide. I looked at it for something I realized after putting this presentation together was that target households had to have a child that was just born at the beginning of the study, and so their average age might be lower than other households. And so that's something that I compared. I forgot that it wasn't actually exactly what you asked. I found that there wasn't a huge difference between target households and other households in terms of age. As far as over calendar time, it was rolling, so it's not just based on calendar time. So like the 1.5 years starts for every household. Like the parent child didn't conclude on one date. It concluded as people finished the study. So I think age ended up being balanced out because everyone was going through the same duration of the study. They were starting at different points. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks very much for the just wanted to check on how you delivered the intervention. Did you use maybe house of visits or group meetings to meet these participants, or you used both? Either way, which you used, which do you think worked well to the success of the diarrheal disease among the study participants, the target group with the intervention?
That's a great question that I really can't answer because I came in to this team after the trial was fully concluded. I can say that it was had intensive like meetings and focus groups to even come up with the design of the intervention. Actually, I don't know if you want to say anymore.
Sure, I'll chime in real quick. So, the organization we're working with, the International Center for Diarrheal Disease Research, Bangladesh, ICDDRD, they were the ones who implemented the installation of the latrines. The households kind of provided labor when they could, and a modest financial contribution. I don't hear a difference. And the promotion aspect was just really intensive household visits to engage in a conversation with the household members. And it was, I think the community health promoters really got into it, and they ended up visiting households even more often than we had asked them to. So I think there was a lot of established kind of rapport and trust, and a lot of individualized conversations around utilizing the sanitation behaviors. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
I'm loud enough. I don't need the microphone.
Other questions?
Can I ask you? So, did you provide pit latrines and did you provide any guidance like how they were going to manage when the pit latrine is going to fall, how they're going to manage it, or how they'll know about those things?
Yeah, so it was improved pit latrines, and I am not familiar with emptying practices, or if that was part of the intervention. I should.
It was a double pit design, so the idea was, right, I'm loud, it's okay. So the idea was, right, we had 2 pits dug up and then 1 superstructure, so then 1 filled up. The idea is you pick up the superstructure, put it on top of the other pit, and in that meantime, the contents of that first pit have enough time to be, kind of for oxygen evacuation and such. We didn't really have an explicit kind of full flow fecal management, right, sort of like recommendations. And I do think folks continue to kind of do what they did. And, some of it being buried on, on the near the compound, or some pits being emptied into water bodies. But the hope was that by the time that occurs, right, the contents of the pit have just gotten through natural kind of activation patterns.
The mic is for the online audience.
She's loud enough to.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's quite interesting to note that you couldn't see any significant difference between the high intensity and the low intensity in terms of the interventions. And in most cases, when you talk of behavior change, people always say that the interventions should be implemented for a prolonged period of time rather than for a short period of time. But you did not find to implement it for a long period of time to really help in changing the behaviors. That's really important. And do you know why it had to happen like this, that the high intensity did not bring any significant change when you compare to the low intensity? Because that is very important. Yeah.
So I do think that it was, I would count that as long-term promotion, because it was 2 years of the intensive visits. And so on average, 6 times a month for over 2 years, or for 2 years, they were being visited. I assume short-term promotion would be something like 1 visit, or just this very acute event. Instead, it was ongoing for the duration of the parent trial. And that was by design. That was the trial. And then in the sub-study, we happened to be collecting data essentially in the same setting and in these same households. And so I think it's a positive that there was no difference. What it suggests is that there was an effect. And so the promotion probably had something to do with that, contributing to a reduction in diarrhea. And once that started to slow down, and then when it stopped, the effect didn't go away. So, which I thought of a lot as maybe just like a reporting thing, as potentially like when you're seeing the field staff less often, might be less likely to, might be less subject to this like social desirability, courtesy bias type stuff. Or maybe you give up on some of the behaviors that were being taught because people aren't there constantly checking on you. So it seems to be that those behaviors continued, or whatever mechanisms led to the effects weren't impacted by fewer and then no promotional visits. It'd be great to see if that continued much longer than just the 6 months of no promotion, but that would suggest hopefully a good thing.
Hi, thank you. Really interesting. I'm interested, actually I have 2 questions. One, were you able to look at changes in behavioral determinants that may have attenuated the impacts of the high and low intensity behavior change or behavior promotion activity? And then the second question is, do you have the capacity to look at potentially community level or group level factors that may have driven the uptake of these behaviors, especially when you're looking at infant and young child feces and sort of that as a mechanism for creating more hygienic environments? Thank you.
Yeah, so in terms of community, we do have a published paper, Aisha and I, on, and many co-authors, who I feel bad, sorry for not pointing you out. I'm talking to you, you must be online, Ben. So we have another paper on community coverage in general. So that doesn't get to like the behavior component of, which I don't know if that exists. I don't think that does. Aisha's team did a community sanitation survey just to see what types of latrines were available within 100 meters of all of the study households. And we did find that coverage in the different ways that it covers a very complicated thing because there's no set definition. So we tried chopping it up in different ways and did find that there are associations between household environmental contamination and diarrhea, depending on your neighborhood sanitation levels. those households weren't intervened on, and so something like osmosis of the behaviors would be really cool to know, but I don't think that this is set up to understand that.
Perfect. Let's thank Dr. Contreras. I'm just going to check if our first speaker is here today. Okay. Our final presentation is by Sita Lupreti from EOR, and he's going to tell us about state of affairs of open defecation-free status in flood-prone regions in southern Nepal. Sita.
Thank you, Siddharth. Hi. The last presentation on the last day of the conference. So there is a conference tomorrow, but we don't have any oral presentation. So I hope I can still get your attention.
Entertain us.
So I'll be talking about this project we've been doing for a year and a half with Oxfam Nepal. So we're looking at open defecation-free status in a specific region of Nepal. And I'd like to thank all the people involved, Oxfam and also consultants that work in this project. So a little bit of background. Nepal was declared, the whole country was declared open defecation-free in September 30th, 2019, 2 weeks before India declared open defecation-free. I don't know if there was a competition or, but it was declared right before India did. But there were a lot of issues that were coming up, like there were a lot of places that said that, okay, maybe 95% is the threshold to declare open defecation-free. Is it actually met or not? And there were, right after the declaration of open defecation-free as a whole country, there were a lot of news that came out saying that, okay, there are a lot of places where people are still defecating outside. There are a lot of households that don't have the toilets. So what we decided to do was look into it a little bit in detail. So we decided to focus on a region called Tarai. You'll see this a lot. It basically means the southern region of Nepal, also map in a little bit. But in 2016, in this region, there was only 51% coverage of the toilets. But in 2019, it was apparently 95%. There are a lot of issues with behavior, suboptimal use in this region. Also, these were the last districts that were declared open defecation-free when they decided to declare open defecation-free the whole country. And then on top of that, this region also suffers with a lot of flooding events. So there are extreme annual floodings that happens in this region. Issues with maintenance, operation of toilets, and also lack of human resources have been seen and documented in several research papers. So we decided to look at three main objectives. The first was to look at the usability and functionality of the toilets in the flood-prone region of Eastern Tarai. We also wanted to assess if the constructed toilets were resilient to flood events in the future. And we also wanted to do the microbial water quality of the households. So I'll show the results in a little bit. The way we designed the research was we started with KIIs, key informant interviews. We had 16 participants from NGOs, government, female community health volunteers, in the 4 districts we chose. And based on their feedback and feedback from KIIs, and we designed the household surveys. And then we surveyed around 1,000 households in the region. We also did the water quality sampling and testing for E. coli. And then we did statistical analysis, descriptive, and also MLR. So the KII observation we saw was, according to participants, a total sanitation behavior change was not achieved even after the completion of ODF campaign or ODF declaration. That was the feedback. The ODF campaign, they said, was focused a lot on quantity, number of toilets rather than quality of the toilets. And the assumption was 30% of the households were suboptimally using the toilets. They also pointed out that a lot of the times, because these campaigns were run through the central government, so we had a sanitation master plan, sanitation and hygiene master plan, so it comes to the central government, but they really pointed out that to have an effective intervention, local governments would take over the responsibilities. So based on the KIIs and also several reports, our site selection had a criteria for the flood-prone region. So the site should be a flood-prone region. We refer to flood assessment reports, disaster management reports that the districts and the country publishes to do that. We also consulted with local NGOs and community organizers. The other site selection criteria was it had to be, close to the labs. And also for each district, we chose 3 local governments, 1 district headquarters, 1 urban municipality, and 1 rural municipality. So we had three for each district. So these are the districts. So we had 4 on the southern region of Nepal, so that's called the Tarai region, bordering India. So on the south is India. So we had Rautarhat, Serlahi, Siraha, and Saptara district. Each district we sampled around 255 households, totaling to around 1,000 households. So data collection process started with hiring the enumerators and training them on what we're trying to do, project introduction, and also talking about how to collect the survey using Global Toolbox, and also on water quality sampling as well. You can see the pictures of the training. This was also a part of the training. You can see Global Toolbox being used in the cell phone, and we'll collect your water samples as well. The 3 findings, this was a little bit surprising. So if you look at the coverage, at least in the households we surveyed at, 21% of the households didn't have toilets at all. 74% had toilets and 4% had shared toilets. And this is a little surprising because the national guidelines says that to declare a zone, a district, community open defecation free, you need to have 95% or more toilet coverage. So this was a little surprising. When you look at the containment types, it was not surprising at all. So majority had septic tanks, single pits, and few had septic tanks and twin pits and so on. And as we also looking at the flooding aspect, the households we surveyed, in 35% of the households reported that they have encountered problems in sanitation systems and services because of flooding in the past. And most of it had to deal with toilet being filled with floodwater or even toilet being washed away. If you talked about damage, pipe, and so on. So you can see a bunch of different criteria, bunch of different problems that the flooding was putting in sanitation systems and services in the region. So we chose 2 dependent variables, so suboptimal use and partial structured toilets. So basically, suboptimal use was identified based on households' response on the use of defecation purpose in the last 2 weeks. For example, if they say always, it's optimal use. If they say sometimes, never, and things like that, we did suboptimal use. And similarly, we also had the other variable is partial structured toilets. If the toilets had no issue, then it was a complete structure. If it has little damage or mostly damaged, then we had partial structure. So 16% of the toilets or 16% of the households were identified as suboptimally using the toilets, and 26% of the households, we noticed that they had partially structured toilets. So then we, out of various independent variables, since our survey was an hour long, so it was like more than 150 questionnaires, so we had a lot of variables. These 15 variables are found to be strongly associated with suboptimal use. So we pulled them together in 3 models. First was general household attributes, the second was sanitation aspects, and the third was user perception. So in this graph over here, we have x-axis adjusted house ratio and the y-axis of education and monthly household expenses. If you just look at the significance in monthly household expenses, richer households having monthly expenses exceeding 15,000 rupees were 37% less likely to suboptimally use their toilets. So this was if the households have higher household expenses, then they are more likely to optimally use their toilets. And this we did more analysis on specific type of septic tank, specific type containments, and also we saw that people having septic tanks, which are more expensive than single pits, were also more likely to optimally use their toilets as well. For this, when you looked at the scientists aspects, what we saw was if the toilets were far, they were 1.6 times or 1.7 times more likely to suboptimally use their toilets. So the location really mattered where the toilet is. So if it's closer to the house, then the use was more frequent. If the toilet was far from the house, then it was suboptimally used. In terms of age, what we saw that the older the toilets are, the more likely they are going to use it properly. So if it's more than If it's less than 2 years, if it's more than 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, you can see that with age, people are more used to using the toilets as well. In terms of functionality, we saw that if the toilets are functional, not always, or really functional, then they're obviously less likely to use the toilet optimally. So that was for suboptimal use. The other variable we chose was the partially structured toilets. We did the same thing, where these variables that were found to be strongly associated with the partially structured toilets. So we pulled them all together and then did some analysis as well. And this is really interesting. So in education, we saw that if the household members had primary education above, then they had more complete structures. But incentives are the interesting part. So for the households that received incentives were almost 5 times more likely to have partially structured toilets. So this was a little bit surprising because we would expect that households receiving incentives would have complete structured toilets, but this was a little surprising. We found this could be because of the sense of ownership, because the sanitation hygiene master plan that talked about the design of the toilets for ODF campaign only talked about up to the plinth level. It didn't talk about superstructure, substructure, and so on. So, and a lot of the houses had the pan, but they didn't have anything surrounding it. Or if they were flooded, there was no mechanism to maintain it either. So if you look at the sanitation aspect, we didn't see any significance over here. But again, like in functionality, if you see that, if the toilet is mostly functional or really functional, then it's more likely to be partially structured than complete structured. One thing we saw over here was damage intensity during last flooding event. So if the toilet was completely damaged, they're obviously 3 times more likely to have partially structured toilets, which means that they were not reconstructing the toilets if it was completely damaged. If it was partially damaged, maybe a little bit, but if it's completely damaged, there was no resources and people are not motivated to construct the toilets again. So we did not do a lot of work on water quality because 78% of the water samples we collected out of 1,000 households had no detection of E. coli. 5% had low risk based on the WHO guideline, 9% intermediate, and 8% high. I just wanted to show it out, but we didn't see a lot of significance in this, since most of the samples had no detection of E. coli. So to conclude, ODF status was not met for more than 95% of the households that have toilets. We saw that 21% of the households we surveyed didn't have toilets. Toilet use was influenced by household financial structure, toilet location, and toilet age. And toilet structure was influenced by education, construction incentives, and flooding damage as well. So after we finished this research, we brought all these stakeholders together and presented the results to them. So these were all the stakeholders, including government, local government, and central government as well. They're not super happy with the 21%, result, but they have finally accepted it. They also helped in writing the policy brief. So we wrote the policy brief at the local level, and government of Nepal was involved in this. So they have finally accepted that there is an issue there's a slippage of this ODF that needs to be, that's not sustainable so far. It needs to have more work on this. So the policy brief is over there. You can grab a copy. It's not final, but with this, I'd like to thank everyone involved. So Oxfam was our main partner in Nepal. So we had local NGOs in all 4 districts we're working at. Sarah, and Angel from Oxfam, and all the field enumerators, and everyone involved in the study. Thank you. I'm happy to take your questions. Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. Just really quick, in one of your slides, in terms of there was a measurement of near or far. Can you give me a sense of what's near and what's far? How far is far?
Right. So we had 4 scales on this. So near was, I think it was less than 100 meters. And far we have 100 to 200, 200 to 300, and so on. So, and we use this based on the survey that was done previously. They use the same scale, so we just borrowed the scale from them. But I don't remember the exact number, but I can check on that, yeah.
Yeah, I'm also having hard time understanding a couple of terms as well, in terms of the usage. In terms of the usage, you said suboptimal to like partial,
Right.
and also for the functionality, you said always functional, mostly functional, rarely functional.
Yeah. I can,
Can you
so
give like-
suboptimal use, we ask questions basically if the household's response and frequency of the use of toilet within the last 2 weeks. If the response was always, we categorize that as optimal use. If the use was 1 time a week or half the time, few times with multiple responses, or never, we categorize that as suboptimal use. In terms of structure, what we had, the questions we asked was this was observation more or less. If the toilet had, pan, flooring, door, wall, roof, if everything was there without any damage, and if it was without damage, the observations were no damage, in rural damage, good condition, or complete structure. So we categorize complete structure in one and other ones as in partial structure toilets. So these were just based on the survey questions as well. So we pooled them together. Yes, please.
Yes, thank you for this highly informative study. But I have one issue. People always want to be associated with good manners and good behavior.
Right.
So if you ask me whether I've watched ants after using their toilet, I will answer yes, because I want to be associated with that. Right. So how did you control for that? Because chances are people will respond that they are using their toilet when actually they are not using it, because they want to be associated with that kind of behavior.
Right. That's a great question. And I don't think I have a good answer for this. But it was mostly, we did the self-reporting. It was based on self-reporting, but a part of the study was also observation. So the field enumerators were trained to see the toilets, to see if it looked like they were being used, if it is usable or not. So it's a lot of, and we try to match or try to verify the answers with field observations. They are not always accurate, and there is not specific mechanism to do that, but we try to control by observation and self-reporting at the same time. Yeah, please.
Then I think it would be good to identify that as part of the limitations of your study, for anyone trying to gauge the strength of evidence for your findings. At least they will find that information.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. I just want to find out why the auditoriums were not preferred compared to the recent one, if I got it right there.
Can you say that again?
Why the auditoriums were not preferred to be used, the old ones, compared to the recently constructed toilets.
Oh, I think so. Why the old ones are being used more frequently than the recent ones? Is that the right question?
Yes.
So the assumption is like people are used to it. So if it's a lot of the times these households, like I showed in the first or second slide, in 2016, more than 40% of the households didn't have toilets. So they were practicing open defecation their whole life. So I think it has to do with this practice and constructing new toilets. Especially when we surveyed older people in the household, they were not comfortable using the toilets at all. They were still going outside because they think that that's what they've been doing their whole life. So they don't want to change their practice, their habit. So with older toilets, I think if you are used to it, maybe, it's just, you keep using it. If you're not, it might take some time to get used to it.
That is quite a quick one. So with the water quality that you did,
Right.
was that point of source or point of use?
Point of use in the households. So we basically asked everyone in the household to bring the water in a cup.
Okay.
Or in a mug, yeah.
Yeah. Then just another quick one. You mentioned just now that some of the older folks didn't prefer that, they still wanted.
Yeah.
Did you do a qualitative study? How did you find out that? could there have been more social barriers or social norms to it than what you found?
Yeah, it was embedded in our survey as well. So whenever we ask the questions, if you're using toilets or not, if it's a no, then we're asking who in the households were not using the toilets. This was mostly older people. And then during our KII, the key informant interview also, this came up quite often. I don't think it has to do with, from what I know, it didn't have to do with social norms, but it was just a practice that was going on that they had a hard time changing.
But did they have a reason for doing?
No, they were just very comfortable with it.
Yeah, so that's a reason.
Yeah.
Rather than something practice they are used to, they were comfortable with, so that means that was not that comfortable.
Exactly. The older crowd was comfortable doing it. The younger crowd changed their behavior. In recent days is what we found at least. And this is very qualitative observation. That's not exactly from the survey.
So in good to like do maybe more focus groups.
Yes.
Separate the older adults and then the younger folks to see the in-depth on that. I think there could be more to it than just that.
That's true. I agree. And yeah, maybe that's something we can explore as well.
Yes.
That's really good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good observation. Thank you. James.
Hi, thanks, Atal. Really great presentation. Thank you. In your introduction, you talked about how some of the latrines could be flooded and be filled with water. And this might be outside of the scope of what you were looking at, but I'm curious, A, what is the remediation strategy for when your latrine fills with rainwater? And two, how much of the suboptimal use do you attribute to not rebuilding your toilet after it's been destroyed once? This is coming up a lot in some of the work that I've been doing. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great question, James. So the first question you said, what do people do when it gets flooded, right? So I think again, this was not embedded in the study, but from what we got back when we were talking to them, it depends on the household itself. If they're willing to, call the service and empty it, and it's not just flooding the pit, the toilet itself, it's also filling the pit very fast. So, in some places they had these service where they can call the FSM service and, empty it out. And when they empty the pit out, they're also helping with, helping with getting the water out of the pan as well. So I think it depends on the household level, if they're willing to do it, if they have resources to do it. There is no mechanism from the outside that will help them do it. That was first. The second was what percentage of the suboptimal use was linked to the flooding, you said, right?
Yeah,
We
in
didn't-
general, toilet rebuilding and after those kinds of rainfall or other disruption events.
Right, so we found I don't have the exact number for that, but we found that some households that were able to afford once the toilet floods away, there's a picture over there as well. They built the elevated toilet. That's going on a lot in few places, in two of the districts. But there was also depending on the household if they have resources to do that or not. And there is no subsidy once the ODF campaign is now the ODF campaign is over. There is no subsidy to rebuild the toilets again, or if it floods out, or help maintenance. There is nothing like that at all.
I have a quick question. Is Nepal still open defecation free? And did your study do anything, make a dent of any kind?
It is, yes. Yes, it is. It is still open defecation free country. So whenever we did the workshop, we had Director General of Ministry of Water come and talk about it. He was very skeptic because of the sample size, but there was a recent UNICEF study that also showed around 22% households not having the toilets. So the last I heard was they're working on a strategy to fix it. But that's all I can tell you.
Any other questions? Great. Oh. You'll have to wait for the beer.
Mine is not a question, but
yeah,
I would like to give a general comment about open defecation. I think we may have to rethink open defecation because we are more interested in controlling, ensuring that human fecal matter is well managed. But we have animals that are grazing on free range, that are defecating on the environment, and the effects of animal fecal matter is the same as the effects of human fecal matter. So I really don't know. I don't want to say it loud because there's a lot of resources that have been pumped into ensuring that villages are open defecation, especially in Kenya where I come from. But you'll find public health officers trying to ensure that they control open defecation in nomadic communities where animals are moving on free range, they are defecating everywhere, and the same animal fecal matter is contaminating our water resources. So I just don't know what we need to do about it, but we need, it's our food for thought.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, everyone.
Great, let's thank Dr. Preti. One last call, is our first presenters here? Okay, please go enjoy the poster session.
It's out there. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it. Thank you. Oh, I did. Yes. Oh, cool. Right. Yes, yeah.